who is the founder and CEO, as I mentioned, of VALOREM Advisors. Anna's just worked in New York for around 10 years at multinational companies, the likes of EY, PepsiCo, Goldman Sachs, across various financial roles. Upon returning to India and working for a few years on the sales side, he realised that there was a need to kind of drive investor relations in this country, and so launched VALOREM Advisors. They're one of the largest IR management service companies in India to date. I'm also joined by Arvind as well to my left, who's an experienced head of IR, with demonstrated history of working in the pharmaceuticals industry, including most recently at Lupin. He's skilled in several different areas of investor relations and graduated from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. And Arvind, I wanted to chat to you first because we were originally going to be joined by Ramesh, the CFO of Lupin, but unfortunately he had to go to the US on an urgent kind of business item. It just really proves how crucial and how valuable senior management time is and how much you're fighting for it. And as the head of investor relations, how do you make sure you get enough of your management's time?
So I think in our company it's a very focus area from the company perspective, and right since Ramesh joined in 2007, that focus has remained. So I have a full access to the top management, including Ramesh on a regular basis, including all investor interactions, what is the street perception, and what regular IR function typically does. So they are on top of things, but at certain times, in terms of business exigencies, etc., you tend to focus on other things. So I kind of handle the mantle during that period. But it's been gradual, and while the external perception could be that it's a promoter-led company, like most Indian companies are, at Lupin, this level of professionalism has helped us over a long period. And just a data point that can prove this point, way back in 2007 or maybe even 2005-06, our FII shareholding in our overall pie was close to 9%. It reached up to a high of 35% till a year back, and then there was some sell-off in the pharma sector. We are still ranked second highest in terms of FII participation across pharma sector versus it was at number 7 10 years back. So it's been very gradual, very concerted, and it continues. And which is also one of the reasons, if you look at in terms of communication through multiple channels, since 2006 we've been having annual investor conference. I think I can say that we are the only company who has done that consistently through the cycle across periods, because it gives a platform for everybody to have access to management thoughts and views. So I think there is still scope to improve, and that realization is always there. And particularly in this time when the industry is going through a relatively turbulent times, the communication, the cultivation of a relationship with investors who matter is really important, which is what most of my time is spent on.
Yeah, I imagine so. And it's that word maximising, I guess, is the key. It's making the most of the small time you're given. Anuj, as well, you set up VALOREM around 10 years ago. So I imagine this same kind of timeline that Arvind's been talking about here, you've seen kind of the journey that IR's been through in this country, how perceptions have changed, and what IR needs to do to try and change the perception, because sometimes it has a bit of maybe an unfair reputation. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think I think my friend Anand in his opening speech gave a lot of points about how that has happened. But I think the core reason is to probably to go back and to understand the Indian equity markets. The Indian equity markets did not get, we got liberalization in '91, and until the mid-90s, the number of institutional investors in our country were a handful. It is really after that we saw a whole influx of institutional investors, whether it was foreign or mutual funds, insurance companies, and it is this breed of investors that expected a whole different level of communications. Until then, I think this job of investor relations was done by the public relations or PR. Until date, it is done by that department in many organizations. I have a lot of funny stories, and on the investor side, I till date get a lot of suspicious questions as to what is the incentive mechanisms of investor relations officers or even an external investor relation management company like ourselves, and they always feel that it's equity linked. And they're always surprised when we just tell them that we have a very simple job of storytelling, which is the fundamentals and financials of companies and more than that, and strategies and whatnot. And at the end of the day, whether they buy or don't buy, whether they write a sell report or a buy report, that's their decision. But our job as IROs is actually to create a better understanding. And investors, the other aspect was investors always felt that this job was more of a secretarial role to access senior management or a data point gatherer, which I think there's a lot more to that. Even on the corporate side, I think a lot of companies found it doubtful as to that an investor relation officer or somebody else can actually do the job of a promoter or a CEO to explain their business, their products, their business strategies, their growth, their potential to an investor in a better way than they could. But the fact of the matter is, this is what I was always very surprised about. If a sell-side analyst could do that job based on his assumptions, his analysis, his analysis at the end of the day to the buy-side analyst, why couldn't a good investor relation officer do that? And at the end of the day, we as investor relation officers, whether internal or external, we have a very big advantage, which is we learn the businesses from the horse's mouth, which is the promoters, the CEOs, the CFOs, and also we have the access to various departments of the companies that we manage investor relations for. So it is, I think, how we can as IROs change perceptions is very simple, in my opinion, comes down to is understand the investor psychology, their likes, their dislikes, and actually bridge that knowledge gap, because at the end of the day, it is the investor is just looking for that. And promoters, there's a lot of value addition because promoters, don't have the time to actually, or shouldn't have the time to actually sit and meet with investors on a day-to-day basis and just service them in terms of everything. So I think there's a lot of work and a lot of value addition that investor relation officers can do, and I think it's happening slowly in India.
Slowly but surely.
It's
Definitely progress. And just on that note, because you've spent a lot of time working in the US and for those big household names that I mentioned, I mean, obviously there are differences in how IR works here and the status of it. But I wonder if the two of you, how is there something unique about the Indian IR role, and how does it compare to different countries' experience?
Oh, I think that investor relations is at a very nascent stage, as I rightly said. It's I mean, the sheer fact that the example of this is that 10 years ago when I started VALOREM Advisors, the number of earnings con calls that were there on the peak result days was not more than 5, 10, maybe 20. Today, on an average peak result season, there's hundreds of earnings con calls. So that's changing. In terms of the US or the developed markets, investor relation as a function has been around for decades. I remember at PepsiCo, when I was a part of the strategic planning group, one of the key we had to communicate with the investor relations teams all the time, and it is then when actually I realized the importance of this function. I don't think India has even seen a lot of the evolution of investor relations. I mean, we shareholder activism, proxies. I think this is still at a very nascent stage in India. In Goldman, we had a hotline for investors to actually call into and give their grievances, just clear doubts. And this was a call center with quite a lot of, I believe, hundreds of investor relation people who had FAQs with them, who could constantly ask or escalate questions to senior management and to understand that. So I think we are at a nascent stage, but I think what I've seen in the last 10 years is that it's going to grow very, very rapidly.
Fantastic. And on to this next idea of, and I know this is something that we discussed when we were preparing for this call, the idea of packaging yourself as an IRO to kind of command more respect, to improve your perception within a company. And I wondered if you could both talk to kind of, a couple of key points in how you might improve that and stand it. I know you can take a slide as well.
Sure. I think, I think in order to change perception, first of all, I think the IRO job is an extremely dynamic one. It's not just one of a financial analyst. It actually requires, and in a lot of my interviews with my team that I hire or constantly talk to, I think I try to bring out the whole dynamism about this job. There's a lot of skills that you really need, whether it is creative writing, whether it is presentations, creative speaking, public speaking. But more importantly, I think at the end of the day and at the bottom line, I think there's one function that actually stands out or can actually improve perceptions amongst whether corporates, investors, or respect for ourselves as the IROs is simply knowledge. I think respect will only be out of knowledge. And here is where I think the gap lies, is that if you're able to do that effectively by understanding the business of your client companies, the fundamentals and financials, and just through the storytelling, I think the fruits of the efforts are right in front of you, and I think, yeah.
So I think it's, taking cues from what Anu said, it's more about taking a 360-degree approach. It's not just about communicating uniformly to the external world about your business story, etc., but also giving back important and critical feedback to the top management as well as the business teams that you continuously work with. While your understanding of the business grows in the company and you have a depth of information, you have to be very sensitive to the compliance and regulatory requirement to give limited information at a public level, and it can't be selective. So, all those decision-making notes as to what information should be there and what should be uniformly there, how do you ensure that it is uniformly communicated across channels is very critical. And like I said, it's not just about your story, it's also constantly updating the competitive dynamics to the top management, or giving them perspective as to what the shareholder movements have been, what could be their weightages in the various indices, how is the investor sentiment moving towards the sector, and how can you position your story in the wake of that. So you have to be very much on your feet. What story of yours fit in with investors' concerns, if there's a particular area which is of a bigger concern right now, and what are you doing to address it. So it's got to be a very 360-degree approach, and which is where management over time realizes that impact. Possibly in my case, what would have helped is that I have spent a lot of time in sell-side equity research as well as on the buy side, so I understand what is expected of that. But at the same time, the management is also being used to a certain level of communication, so you tend to navigate to the next level in terms of being less of a reactive IR function than being proactive in terms of how to reach out. So I think those things are evolving, and I think some of the companies have had some big start, but it's the overall country IR practice which needs to keep up. And I think support from external IR firms, etc., who have far more professional expertise, etc., can help bring at least the mid-tier and the smaller companies up to speed on that. So that is a very welcome industry dynamic evolving.
Yes, I hope so. I mean, it's something we see in lots of other markets, that collaboration aspect is so important. And just being in touch with IROs from different kinds of companies, different cap sizes, kind of sharing those experiences, because so often in our conversations, my conversation with IROs, it turns out that the most testing time can be when you have a question you don't quite know how to answer, so you need to turn somewhere. I wanted to ask the two of you actually about the kind of role of the IRO and how it differs at different companies and cap sizes within India, with that in reference to looking at other countries. Can you take us a little bit through about how that role changes and how formalized the function is from a small cap to a large cap?
So I'll take the first cue on how a bigger difference between developed market and India possibly is also because, in terms of guidance, except for the technology sector, none of the other sectors, barring few companies, have a formal policy of giving guidance. Most Indian companies have a certain way of doing it. Maybe they give parts of the guidance and then they keep giving more an outlook statement than a guidance per se. Whereas in the US, in terms of earning expectation, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year or to the end of every reporting period, the gap would be at best 2 to 3%, through the consensus. In India, the gap can be as wide as 20%. So how do you navigate that expectation range and ensure the street is aligned to the right direction, still not giving out any guidance is a bigger challenge. You rightly said, that there will be points when you'll be come across with questions which you cannot handle or answer. You have to be very tactful and very firm in terms of what information you need to give. Like I said, the integrity is very important in terms of, not giving selective disclosure to a particular set of investors just because they are existing investors or whatever. You need to be very fair and equal to everyone. So this evolution is happening. Coming to the second part, from mid cap to small cap or large cap, I think it's not about the size alone. It's also about the industry dynamics. In a capital intensive industry like an infrastructure or a finance company, etc., that nuancing is very, very critical. You need to be very much up on the edge because sooner than later you will be reaching out to investors for fundraising. So you need to tell your story very consistently. I'm not saying companies like FMCG or pharma who relatively tend to go to the capital market less frequently need to take it lightly. But I'm saying that apart from the size, the industry-specific dynamic also plays a role. So that evolution, like I said, over time when you access capital market more frequently, there are more depth coming in. I think the day before yesterday, SEBI announced that they are looking for more guidelines for overseas listing of Indian companies. So that shows the importance of opening up the global market in terms of fundraising. And when you want to expose your company to a global index like NASDAQ or Dow or whatever, then your level of disclosure, your preparedness, etc., needs to go a notch up. So all of that, learning curve needs to be fast, and I think the depth of capital market needs to increase. I think the other thing what can help this move forward is deepening of the bond market in the country. Many companies in the developed market also have a very active investor relation functions, not just because of the equity raising that they do, but also for the bond raising that they keep on doing on a very recurring basis. But that part lacking in India, is also one reason that may be drag at this point.
Yes, absolutely. It requires someone with a different, maybe not entirely different skill set, but a different approach, bonds, investor relations. And it's something I don't understand particularly well. We do sections about it quite often, and it's always something to find out. And there's anything to talk about.
Yeah, no, I think Arvind covered that pretty well. Look, at the end of the day, I tell our client companies, or even our IROs at our company, one very simple thing is that we need to do justice. So at the end of the day, we advise over 50 companies, or actually manage the investor relation for over 50 companies, and many of these are small and many large. But at the end of the day, if you look at the Indian capital markets or the equity markets, not more than 7 or 8 of them have actually, who are in the Nifty 50, have been around for many decades. There are companies that come and the companies that go. So whether the company is small or large, as an IRO, we have a very important job to do, is to do justice to the promoters, to the company, to the business, of telling their fundamental story and do justice to their life's hard work. So it's a very, very critical, important job, in my opinion, that needs to be taken seriously by not only, most importantly, for the hard work of the corporates that are there. In terms of the standards, I think Arvind's hit the bullseye at the end of the day. There is a whole lot of things that we can do, but I think we've just scratched the surface, or are scratching the surface. Most Indian companies have and I'm generalizing here, that have that just want to do enough or what is required by the regulations. I think the regulatory environment can improve significantly. I think investor relations best practices, I believe strongly that today or 10 years down the line, like it is in the mature developed countries, is going to become a necessity of a function. And there needs to be certain guidelines for IROs, for investor relation practices, for various other things to kind of mature this industry and not just do enough, but the line is always very thin, right? You can't do too much, and you can't say a lot, and you can't say too little. It's just the right thing. But at the end of the day, the end goal is to gain the investor confidence, faith that you have to do. We can't give too much information that is going to be competitive in nature and harmful to companies that we represent. But we have to give enough for the investor to create a model, to actually to understand the growth prospects of this company, and where the rest of the world is, where India is, I think, in terms of guidance and all these things. You know, we're I would say not even 10% there.
I'd like to come back to that point about investor education, because that's one of the key, the key tenets of good IR. But I wanted to briefly ask you, there are some big themes in good IR, right? There are one of our favourite words at IR Magazine is transparency. It's something that comes up in every interview with the top IROs, like being transparent. And we also know that, as we've just heard from Anish, you've got to be careful about the information you withhold, the information you release, and when and how much. And I just wondered if you could talk a few good things, like a few of these big topics, like governance, transparency, and timing. Can you elaborate on how these make for good IR progress as well?
Like I said, as a company, and I'll come to our practices, we tend to be very fair and equal with everyone, and that is the guiding principle, which is why, for every set of information, maybe for our industry per se, there could be a set of, I would say we have devised an SOP for what would you do in case of a product approval, what is the level of information you will give, what would be the timing, or what is the time limit by which you should give, and all those things, what kind of information you should give out for an acquisition which is sensitive in nature to the extent that you have to comply with the regulator or SEBI's requirement. So, forming a definitive SOP and sticking to it more like a discipline and internalizing is important. That part, takes effort, because subconsciously you always feel that, you take it on the go. But if it is more disciplined and structured, it helps you across the continuity of the IR function. Because, the person leading this function might change, but from a company perspective, those policies remain very clear. So that is very important. And I think that also helps when you deal with a very nuanced and polished set of investors over time. When you move on from more public holding to more institutional investor base, you realize that the level of questioning or requirement from them is also improving. So you need to be up to speed to that, and which is where that transparency and clarity that you build with investors over time help you in getting their confidence over a period.
Absolutely, that's, like I said, I really wanted to come back to that point about kind of investor education, I think is the best way to put it, and closing the gap between your understanding of your company and the external understanding of your company, and how you can really make them understand it better. What are the ways of closing that gap between perception and reality, or between consensus and reality, maybe?
Yeah, I think. Look, I think this is the heart of investor relations, right? At the end of the day, the reason why I believe that the reason why investor relations as a function it does not get that great of a respect, or hasn't been, is probably this. It's the knowledge gap that is there. So it is various tools that an IRO can use, whether it is great collaterals, whether helping with financial models, and various other aspects that an investor relation officer can do to bridge this gap of the investor education about their companies. But at the end of the day, the companies as well as the investor relation officers have to work together to understand what the need of the requirement is from the investor community, and actually just bridge that gap. But yeah, I think there's a lot of tools. We use certain kinds of, we do a lot of creative presentations where we try to make the information out there for a lot of our companies not simple, not boring, but informative enough for the investor to get to do his analysis very quickly. So we have things like tools like investor kits, very creative presentations, fact sheets and financial models, which are historical, which makes it easier for them to make forward and without giving them that information. So there's a lot of tools that investor relation officers can do that in order to bridge this gap.
Another same question to you. What are your tips for investor education, closing that gap?
So, like I said, the gap between the consensus expectation versus what you think can come up. As an IRO, you should try to be more conscious about what the street, at least the important or analysts that you think the street reads more, are writing about your company, and if there's a gap in perception or there's a lack of clarity, but just for the gap of information that they are not able to give the right picture, you try to reach out to them and try to tell them what exactly the story is. Like Anuj has been saying, and I've also maintained that storytelling is a key part of IRO, but it has to be very consistent and uniform. And the moment you see there is an inconsistency in terms of what story you've been telling and in terms of what they've been getting, you would try to bridge the gap. Similarly, on a periodic basis as an IRO, you should try to meet the sell side, not just to ask them to change their views or perception, but just to align in terms of what their concerns, what their issues are, for whatever reason. Even if they are too bullish on the stock and you think that there are current near-term challenges, it's always wise to give them the realistic picture, and which is what we've always believed. I think what helps is from the top management, and all of this communication is fine on. What helps is when the top management is very clear that the role of IRO is not to move or influence share prices, but to give the storytelling. That is the founding principle, which helps the IRO do his job a lot better. I think that is what is helping, at least in our company, in terms of that clarity being there, that you are able to do your job with much more perfect.
Yeah, if I can actually add on to that also, at the end of the day, the investor community that we are catering to, these guys are usually sector analysts, and at the end of the day, teaching them the sector is not going to add any value. But being informed about the sector, but more importantly, the value addition can come that they might be sector specialists, but we are company specialists. They might know the sector better than us, but at the end of the day, we know the company better. And there is these softer skills that are actually more what they need than actually tell them about how the pharmaceutical sector is going or how the infrastructure sector is going. It's actually the strategy, the softer aspects where what is the management thought process? What is the direction that they're looking at? What kind of strategic initiatives are they going to take to actually take their company to the next level? It's that aspect that cannot always be used in terms of the easier tools, which are annual reports and presentations and all. And that, I think, is the investor, is one of the biggest gaps also, that as IROs, they look for us for those insights into those companies which to make those smarter investment decisions other than just how the infrastructure sector is going.
Absolutely. You would hope your investors would know that, like you say already.
Of course, yeah.
We've got time for, I think, maybe one or two questions, if there are any from the audience forthcoming, just before we finish this session. If you need a second to think about it, I have one more question for Alice here, which to kind of in the spirit of today, to give the IROs and the audience, a takeaway, some advice, something they can take back to their companies and look at themselves. If you could kind of give one piece of advice about how IROs can change their perception within a company, particularly from the management perspective, what would it be?
So I would just have one thing to add, and I mentioned it earlier possibly, understanding of business, collaborating with your business teams, etc. to get the real understanding is very important than just looking at the financial numbers. And the second part, like I mentioned, you are not supposed to be just taking information from them. If there is market intelligence that you gather over time of interaction with investors or analysts, etc., you should try to share with them. Sometimes can be a very small competitive information which possibly an inside approach the company might not be looking at, but since you have an outside-in view, you can help change the perspective. That helps a long-term collaborative framework for an IRO to function, and then you are also adding value to the team per se. So I think that is one thing.
So actually, Arvind stole my answer, which I think at the end of the day, the bottom line is knowledge, right? Knowledge gets respect. But if I could add upon that, I think beyond, there's something beyond investor relations, which actually we probably did not touch upon a lot, was the strategic aspect of an investor relation officer. I think Arvind spoke about the feedback and all. It is so critical because investor relation officers across the world are parts. Anand spoke about how investor relation officers have grown into become CFOs. I met an investor relation officer out of Silicon Valley 5 years ago, and he was a part of the board of directors of his company. And the fact of the matter is investor relation officers can play a very, very important part on how to shape a company. I tell a lot of my companies, the CEOs and promoters of a lot of my clients, that the best advice that you can get is the free advice you can get from the shareholders as well as the investor community, especially the institutional ones. The retail investor is always going to ask for more dividends. That's always the case. But it's the investors or the analyst's job to actually analyze the company along with its peers to see what have been the positives and negatives and how these companies have made mistakes or not made mistakes. And when they're giving an advice, it's very important to listen very carefully and take that feedback to the senior management, because they're not probably saying it for any hidden agendas. The only hidden agenda that could happen is that they may invest in the company or may recommend their investors to buy. So it's really that strategic role that actually changes IR. And I would love to see investor relations one day as that, because I see a lot of, I know we're running out of time, but I see a lot of, in India especially, almost every board of directors has chartered accountants or CAs who've taken these companies in their board, right? From when they were babies to what they are today. I would love to see as investor relation officers us to be a part of a lot of these boards, because I think it can make a difference.
Absolutely, like I said, there is a history of it happening elsewhere. And you're right, I'm sad to say we are just about out of time, but on that point about finding out some more about the buy side, we'll be coming back to that in our session after our break. We'll also be looking at crisis management in our very next session following the coffee break, which will be now from 10:30 until 11. If you can make it back here for 10:55 so we can get underway very quickly, that would be excellent. And please join me in giving a round of applause for Arvind and Anish for their excellent work. So see you back here in 25 minutes. Thank you.